broadcasting live to YouTube now as well, assuming it goes. I certainly hope it does. It seems to be going better than it was last time. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Well, we'll start our meeting. Welcome, everyone. This is the Policy Review Committee of representing the school board and leadership. And we will begin with, see, now I don't have anything in my view. So we have our agenda for the evening. We have several policies we'll be reviewing today, some with changes, some that are new. And so we'll start with Stacy with policy 522.
Okay. Policy 522 is pretty much getting a reboot. The Department of Education came out with a new ruling on implementation of Title IX, investigations, implications, process, just a number of different things. And so really it's going to incorporate moving beyond just protection for students as far as related to sports, student level sexual harassment, and is actually going to carry all the way through to any type of sexual harassment claims, regardless of age. So this will now encompass adults as well as students. So it's going to impact two of our policies. It impacts policy 522 as well as policy 422, which deals with our sexual harassment for staff members. So going through it, we have to identify a number of different roles. We've always had a Title IX coordinator, but now we'll have a Title IX coordinator, which will be Tiffany, and then I'll be the alternate Title IX coordinator. And I'm not sure which document you're looking at. I had Jamie update the one that I submitted to her. So
You can share your screen with us, Stacy. So if you wanted to have it so that, especially if we're on YouTube, for anybody who wants to be able to see the document.
well, actually, I have a printout of my document.
Oh, you have a printout.
I'm doing old school here. I apologize. I can put it up to the camera, but I am.
No. Well, we'll figure out a way to share a screen.
Yeah.
Should I just share it on my screen?
Which is fine.
So the one that we should be looking at designates you, Stacy, as the Title IX coordinator?
Well, no, it designates Tiffany as the coordinator. Also, the one that you're probably were looking at. No, this is the updated one. Okay. There was a lot of commentary from MSBA in the one that we received from them in italics. So that's all been removed from the policy I submitted to you. And so we have a coordinator, which is Tiffany. I'm the alternate coordinator. Part of the reason with that is we also have to identify or have to have an investigator, which is different than the coordinator. And then after the investigator completes their investigation, that is turned over to a decision maker. And then there's an appeals decision maker. So there's and they can't be the same person. So suddenly we have like up to 4 different positions, people that have to be involved in this process. So Tiffany will be the coordinator, which allows her to provide all the supports, make sure all of the steps are being followed. It's pretty much that due process person and on the front end. That frees me up to either be the investigator for adults or potentially Brian to do investigations for students. And then the decision makers can flip-flop in a sense to either I can become the decision maker if he's doing the investigation or vice versa. And then the appeals person would be going to Teresa after that place. In some cases, our investigation, just because of the nature of it, we may even look to an outside firm such as Kennedy and Graven with Maggie's law firm. They may suggest somebody that can investigate the situation. And that may be the case also for adults, because then I need to be a part of the decision-making process with being HR for types of actions that we may need to take against staff members. Well, I'm not going to provide a lot of commentary on the policy. It's based upon the new guidance from the Department of Ed, and it will become cumbersome. I will say that. It's cumbersome in a lot of logistics, but it is meant to give equal access to information, both for the accused as well as the accuser. Also there's the section near the end as far as data retention for up to 7 years on a whole bunch of different components of what is occurring within the investigation, the outcome, well, just a number of different things. Yeah, it's just a rewrite up and down. And this went into effect in August. This was the first update for our policy. The other piece that to comment on or make note of is we have to have a grievance process or a form in which they submit this. We have a, give me a second here.
Hello?
We have right now 3 different ways in which the public can lodge a complaint. Under policy 103, which is just a general complaint process. If somebody, staff members, students, families feel that we are not following a policy, or if there is some type of concern that they have, that is one avenue in which they can file a complaint. 522, there's a form for filing a complaint that is a companion to this policy. And also 413 has a complaint form, which is typically our adult harassment. Once we have the policy approved, 522 and 413, we will probably align that form, that complaint form, to be universal, whether it's student or adult now, for any type of a complaint, since we have to follow this process for investigations, decisions, equal access to information. But there are a number of different ways in which folks could currently even file a grievance, as it's called, if they had a complaint that they needed to. Training, we're pushing out training now in Title IX for this as well, just giving background information on why there's changes to Title IX, what's in that, what does that look like. It's an awareness for our staff as a whole. It isn't meant for them to implement per se, but don't violate at the same time. So along those lines, and what their responsibilities are, that if anyone makes a complaint to them, they are obligated to forward that information as well. Those are pretty much the high level components. There are some things that we have to make sure to take care of student rights under FERPA. Also, if we need to move a student out of a classroom because that may be the accused person. So for the safety of the accused, we may reduce class schedules. And to the level, we still have to provide that free and appropriate public education. We need to make sure we're following the guidance on that as well.
Director Chester, I just wanted to add a note. We changed our norm for when we make changes to policies, we use the strike through, because this is an entirely revamping of the policy. We put the existing policy and did the strike throughs on that and just add this new policy.
Yep, it's a policy overhaul is what it is. It's almost a brand new policy.
In many respects, it is, just because of the scope that is being opened up and the process in which we need to follow. I mean,
Yeah.
the former Title IX policy didn't go anywhere near this level of depth and prescription on that we need to follow.
Great, thank you. Scott, Darcy, do you have any comments, thoughts?
I do have a question. So the policy, as originally written and in the and as revised here, talks about just says on the basis of sex. And so I've seen other Title IX policies that expand that to gender identity, things like that. And so I'm wondering if we should also ensure that we have that language in there, which would also match the language that we have in other policies with those sorts of designations.
Had that exact same thought. And I understand, as I understood, was it Title IX or was it a different title grouping that they referred to as, they didn't identify the gender identity, they just said sex in that. And is that Title IX?
It is
Or is
Title
that-
IX, yeah. And yeah, it is Title IX. And I may go back and seek some advice on this as far as with gender or other types of harassment for protected classes. I mean, the level of prescription in here really is one person doing something to another person as it relates to sexual harassment. And that's the piece, our other harassment policies is open, but this is kind of a victim perpetrator kind of an event. So I would just need to get some guidance on that, if we can open this or expand this to include other protected areas.
Yep, that's certainly fine. Yep, but we want to make sure that we have some, I don't know, respect or understanding or encompassment. That's probably not a word, but encompassing, a range of words that in the past have just meant sex. So,
Yep.
So thank you, Stacy.
Now, because this goes into effect technically on August the 14th, and we still would need to do first read and pass, are we going to be okay with that time?
We're implementing as quickly as possible according to the law. If any cases come up, we will follow this policy, even if it's ahead of let me put it this way. We won't necessarily follow this policy. We will follow the law that this policy is based upon.
Got it.
So regardless, we will, if we have any cases, we will follow that practice.
Okay.
That would supersede the policy anyway.
Mhm. Scott, did you have anything? I know that you're probably sharing your screen, so you might have some screen challenge, because I noticed your picture's not up.
Scott?
Let's see. Ah. There we go.
Hold on.
Oh, you're unmuted.
Hello?
Yeah,
Can
you
you
can probably
hear me?
stop. You can probably stop sharing.
I just thought it didn't say I was muted, so I thought I was just having internet problems. Glad it was just my headset. No, I do not have any additional questions. I was curious about that you brought up just a moment ago, and the fact that it's already in the past. But I think Stacy, you explained that. I mean, my interpretation of it is our ability to, as a policy committee, to change this policy is pretty limited because it's so based on the new law. Is that accurate? Maybe I'm not saying it the best way, but
As far as who is protected under this, that's the piece that I need to verify whether we can add to it in that way. But
Right.
the law itself is pretty prescriptive towards sexual harassment
Sure.
and giving rights to both parties.
So then will you investigate that and then bring that back to the, that should probably come back to the committee before we put it to the board agenda then?
I can bring it to the committee, or I can notify you individually that the response. I mean, whichever you would prefer.
Well, okay,
That's the only question.
I'm okay with it coming back just to us, you know, by email or whatever, you know, because that's all that's really doing is
Yeah.
Is that fairly non-substantive change to the
Right.
because we're keeping completely within the spirit and of what the policy is intended. We're just adding some clarifying language if need
Yep.
be.
Okay, good deal. And then, let's see, I have to fidget back and forth. Next on the agenda, I think this is with the cross-reference you're mentioning, the 422, Stacy.
Yeah, and that's the harassment that typically in the past, well, typically it has addressed adults, staff in the district. And so now there's a meshing of that process between all. So 422 was the adult or the staff version of this.
Okay.
Well, let me make sure on that.
Because 422 says policies incorporated by reference. So it looks like you're just at, like, the change was adding the Title 9 522 updated policy. Is that it, or?
Okay, I see what's going on here. Well, we're going to actually have to do two then, because not only will we have to update by reference 422.
Oh.
I'm wondering, I am not seeing, is that a typo, Jamie? Because 413 is the one that deals with harassment for staff.
It's MSBA sent out a when they sent out this policy to update, they suggested that we update policy 422 to include this policy number. That's the only thing that MSBA referenced. I don't know if there's anything else that they wanted us to cross-reference, but that was all
Okay,
in their
well,
update
because
that they sent.
I'm looking online and
Yeah.
I'm seeing 421 and 423, but I don't see a 422. That's why I'm wondering if it's meant to be possibly 522, which
Well, 522 is the one that we're looking at right now.
522 is dealing with student sex non-discrimination.
Yeah, and that's the one that this is replacing, I think.
Oh,
Stacy?
yeah. Then I don't
422
understand what 422 is.
422 is a list.
is a
422
list of policies.
yeah, it's a list of policies that apply to employees. And
It's
so
in
because,
it's in the packet that I sent.
So you just have to add it.
yeah.
We're just adding the
This
title of
policy.
522, the
Yeah.
policy 422. And that was based on MSBA's recommendation.
Okay. Then what I'm going to suggest is when I look on the website, I don't see a 422.
Okay, I'll see why it's not there. It should be there.
Yeah, that's the piece that's kind of throwing me here as far as the reference.
On the website, not the same thing, right?
I'm sorry, that broke up. I missed that, Scott.
Oh, I was just saying I'm on the website, and I also noticed that there is no 422 on the website.
Okay. I apologize. I made the assumption when I saw that it was referring to 413 for the adult harassment. It never dawned on me that it was something else. So, okay. We will find that. I don't have anything else to add to that at this point. So with the 422 piece, I'll work with Jamie to work on that.
Okay. Oh. Am I still sharing? Okay. So then next, let me go back to the agenda. Next on the agenda is policy 532, the use of peace officers and crisis teams. This was something we asked to be brought back from our last review in June. So Stephanie?
Hi, everybody. So we're reviewing an update that that MSBA made, and it's on that last page, just so that everyone kind of gets up to speed, because it seems like June was a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And so they're making suggestions that show through the strike through on the last page, section G. And that just reflects the current policy and procedure that districts are required to do in order to meet their requirements of reporting data around seclusion and some of those pieces. As a policy committee, we had some following questions or follow-up questions that we wanted some information on. One of the questions was, how do we know students have an IEP? And how do the right people know, about this? And because students with an IEP, it's very limited how many students would actually have the potential to be in this situation. And so it's all about good communication with your student support team and staff to know what the behavior intervention plans are, and to make sure that staff are supporting that student in that event. If it's an emergency situation, staff are really good. So it's an unpredicted situation, something that hasn't happened before, and we don't have a plan in place. We still work with building administrators to include special ed staff, or to take a look to see, is this student receiving special ed services, so that we can involve those case managers as soon as possible. Overall, that seems to be going really well as a district. And I know that all districts put that procedure in place. It lies with that student support team. One of the questions was, if they don't have an IEP, what happens? And the answer to that, I think the simple answer to that is it goes back to that discipline policy that we have in place for all students. This is just here to specifically protect the students who receive services. And then the last question we had was a section on part C, page 3, around reasonable force permitted. And in doing some investigations around the state of districts our size, most districts have that section as is, right? So that's MSBA language. And no one has gone out to define, even the Office of Civil Rights doesn't really define it. The most definition I could find, or addition to the MSBA language, came from Minneapolis, interestingly enough. And it said, in compliance with federal and state law, they may use reasonable force. I guess my recommendation would be that we, not every district has this policy. And so my recommendation would be that we do the updates because it does follow what MSBA or what the state is requiring us for reporting on this, and that we continue to keep this on the forefront of our activity. Talking with, legal advice, other superintendents, as we continue to try to improve, how we manage situations like this. But that, I think their advice at this time would be to keep the language as is.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. Scott, Darcy, any additional thoughts or comments to this policy?
None for me.
Yeah, none for me either.
Same here. I'm good.
Okay, great. So then we can add this on as a first read with changes, right? Is that what happens, I think? Mhm.
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the agenda. Next is, I know that Lisa mentioned that this is in correlation to new policies below, but this is 706 acceptance of gifts that we will be reviewing, and we'll need to probably cross-reference then the policies that we're going to be proposing. Okay.
Would you like me to go through that now or later?
You mean to do this more together with the two new policies, or?
Correct.
I think, yeah, sure. I think that's okay.
To do it
So
later?
Well, do you want to, so we have, let me go back to the agenda again. So we have the 3 policies below that are new. We have 2 that are involving the fundraising and advertising, and 1 with service animals. So how about if we have Stephanie goes next with the
Sounds good.
service animals, and then we combine 706 and 511 and 905 with Lisa. So we'll be reviewing a new policy regarding service animals in schools with Stephanie. 535 is the policy. There you go.
Yep. So this is a policy that we do not have, and it has come up in several different conversations. And so I think it is an important one to consider adopting. Service animals are very specifically designed in Section A to make sure that we know who we're talking about here. And currently, I'm not aware of any staff or student that this is happening with. What usually comes up, or where we need guidance, is when somebody wants to bring in, puppies for people to, use during finals, or visiting different classrooms. And we want to be able to have a good foundation in order to provide principals some guidance, and staff for that matter, around that. And I think service animal policy is a good place to start. It's not emergency because we don't have something in front of us. And so because we do our work through an equity lens, what my suggestion would be is to bring this to our district equity committee and let them consider this through that equity lens and give us some recommendations on their thoughts around the policy. How does it fit with our specific district, and what examples or pieces of examples do they have that for our consideration as we move forward with a policy. To have no policy probably puts us out there. And so just having this for your consideration as a committee, and then also running it through our district CPSS equity committee, I think would be a next good step. But I'd be open to feedback from you in terms of other things you think we should do.
Darcy or Scott, do you have thoughts or questions? I like that that we're bringing forward a policy like this, because I have seen several kiddos that have service animals.
So the I have a couple of things. So we define a service animal. We include horse, although the ADA does not include horse. It specifically is dogs only and no other animals. So why is horse?
Yeah, my guess is there's a story behind that, because this is the model MSBA policy. And so we could get the background information on why it is written this way. But my guess is that somebody did have a horse, and so they included that, or others have used that.
Yeah, I think we want to be in line with just what ADA defines as service animals, which is just dogs specifically. So I'd recommend removing horse. Both
I agree with that.
In 3A and in let's see, what was it, 8?
It's in several places.
Yeah. So removing the horsies from the policy. And then my other question was about Roman numerals 10 and 11, which is the non-service animal section. And so like, will people, so this is kind of what you're talking about, Stephanie, right? Where people want to bring in like, you know, a puppy for, you know, to help them during finals, you know, that sort of thing. And so, so we are, but this is also like, wouldn't apply to like, my son would love to bring his cat, you know, with him, you know, but he doesn't have an IEP, you know, he's not an employee, you know, so this is, like, wouldn't like, would it make more, okay, so a couple things about section, Roman numeral 10, like, wouldn't that be written into the IEP as opposed to being like a separate request or a separate, you know, thing? Like, should we have that, you know, piece of it instead? Because I mean, I don't want to limit whatever will help, you know, a child, but also then if it's written in the IEP, then we have more the ability to help people determine when they could or could not bring in, you know, animals, you know, so if it's written to the IEP. And then as far as 11, this is more of a, I don't know under what circumstances what we would have an employee to bring in, because I mean the ADA specifically says these are non-service animals, like what are they called? I can't remember the
Emotional support.
Emotional support animals, right? Exactly.
Sometimes people use the term therapy dogs.
Right. Yep. Exactly. But they're specifically not service animals, and so, like, do we want to put that on the superintendent or the administrator, you know, to make that determination whether they could or could not bring that, you know, service? That's it seems like a situation that would be open up a little bit of a can of worms, and it's kind of a tough thing to make that administrator or that supervisor make that call, you know. And so if it was really something that they needed to have an animal or something there, that seems like more of a like human resources disability kind of situation that should be addressed through that avenue rather than through this policy.
Yep. And I just think a policy like this is going to help us to have those common language or common definitions. So that people right off the bat kind of know where we're at. Yep.
Okay, so those are my comments. Yeah, but I'm open to adding peacock into this list with dogs, because I hear people bring peacocks
on airplanes, but maybe not.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Earlier, did you hear me? Earlier in the policy in section 3A, the definitions, it does address the emotional support animals are not service animals. So I would hope that would address it, whether it's for employees or for students.
Right, but it looks like 10, but it looks like 11,
yeah,
like
leaves
the door open.
That later, so.
Yeah, leaves the door open that maybe you could bring one if you can get your boss to say it's okay.
Good.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Great. And so the recommendation is that you would bring this to the, what was the name of the group?
It's the District Equity Committee.
Equity Committee.
Yep, the CPSS District Committee. I just think that that's a really good place to start, you know, and then, and maybe through the administrator group or leader group as well, because they'll have some examples as well that they can run through and then bring it back.
Okay. Scott, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think my internet fritzed out for a second there, so I missed your question, but I was just saying that it doesn't sound like, I think I heard you say there aren't any current requests for service animals in the district, and my hope would be that if this policy moves forward, that it would only be, very rare instances where it would be approved. I worry for the students who don't have them and the teachers that potentially they can become a distraction. And so maybe that's part of the equity lens and the equity work group or committee that you wanted to share the policy with, is to get their thoughts on that, because we have to balance both, I think.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yep. And
I don't know how people get when animals are around.
right, and I can tell you from my last district that done correctly, they are done very well, and they've been super beneficial to the students that they were part of their lives. And so I think that, again, this is a good foundation for us to pursue as a committee, just to have those in place so it's done right. I think to your point, right, that we have this
Yep.
done when it's needed.
Great. So then have that go through the 2 groups, and then we'll have it come back to us again with any modifications.
Awesome. I appreciate your openness to considering this, and I'll bring it back, work with Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so then next is some new policies and a reference to a current policy. We have 511 student fundraising, 905 advertising, red line, and then gift acceptance or acceptance of gifts, 706. And so, Lisa, which one do you want to start with?
Well, I think first we'll start with a little explanation of how these 3 coordinate together. So the 706 is acceptance of gifts, and does exist within our policies currently. We are not looking to necessarily modify anything about 706 at this time, but it does kind of come into play because when you're talking about donations or gifts, and you're talking about fundraising and then advertising, they all can meld at various different occasions. And so sometimes it's about, you've got a gift that's been received and it has advertising on it, or you're talking about a fundraising in which then that money is being fundraised not necessarily by the school itself or our school district, but rather by an outside entity. And does that fall under our policy or not, kind of concept. So that's why they're brought together. 511, which is school student fundraising, and 905 advertising do not currently exist in our policies. That's not to say we're not fundraising, and that's not to say that we are not advertising. So we need to, I recommend we do move forward with bringing them into our policies. And this has been a challenge for us for the last couple of years of trying to get our head around all 3 of these and make sure we had a structure that could manage them. So as we start talking about them, I guess we can start with 511 as you have that up now, and we can talk about how student fundraising, what you are seeing before you right now, is the MSBA policy with a slight shift for us adding in the term or designee after superintendent. And so this is very simplified compared to past versions of a 511 policy we've brought before this committee before. But we've run into some concerns in past versions in the fact that we were trying to cover so many different scenarios and so many possibilities that it became difficult to actually get the policy passed and approved. So I think what we want to try and do is start here and figure out what we really need to add to it if we need to. Some of the things, for example, that had been talked about before on the 511 student fundraising in the past, we had attempted to address the fact that there are groups that fall under our tax ID and that fundraise under ISD 191, right? Those would be our students. They would be programs that we're offering internally. Then we also have supporting organizations that want to fundraise on our behalf, but they are not necessarily under our tax ID. And we were attempting to bring them into our policy and under that umbrella. And I don't know that that is something we legally can really enforce or manage. So there's that concern. And then there's the concept of crowdfunding. We were trying to address that in the policy, and this does not address the policy or the concept of crowdfunding. We know MSBA is working on a policy related to that. I know that my national organization that I work with, ASBO, is also looking at trying to create one. Everyone's struggling a little bit with that one, and so you don't see a lot of firm crowdfunding policies out there yet. But I recommend that maybe be something we tackle as it comes out more and we have more guidance. And so it's not included in the version that you have before you this evening. Additionally, we were also looking to try and apply the policy in the past to not just the school system and our individual schools, but any school-sponsored organization or school-affiliated organization, and even our individual employees. And I think we're trying to cast that net maybe a little bit too broad in that respect under one policy. This is addressing any of our student activities, and now that student activities are under board control, that's less of a concern. But it would not necessarily apply to the PTOs or booster clubs or other associations that want to do fundraising of their own. They do their fundraising. What we need to get better at is how is it that they refer to us when they're doing that fundraising? Like they have to be very clear about the fact that they are, they're doing this fundraising and they intend to donate that to the school district for these purposes. But it's really then going to fall into the donation policy when it comes to us versus it falling under the fundraising policy, because that's what we cannot control how their fundraisers run. They need to pay the sales tax on those fundraisers, not us. Does that make sense? And then there was some, attempt to address the whole issue of fundraising that's done solely for the purpose of reinstating a program that may have been reduced in budget reductions or creating a new program that we don't have as a fundamental program. And so that too is not included in our current MSBA policy that's before you. So if those are things that the board would like to see included in this policy, we can go back out and try and work on some language that makes sense for some of those things. But we wanted to get a policy before you that you could, see if you could get this approved. And then from there, we see how this flows and get this just up and started. And then from there, we can revise as we need to. So this is 511. And the only thing that you see here that's modified from the MSBA policy is the or designee under 3C and 4. It does call for a superintendent or designee shall report to the school board at least annually on, just going to turn my page a little here, on the nature and scope of student fundraising activities approved pursuant to this policy. We have also seen that 713, which is a policy you just had seen in the board meeting recently, references the same kind of thing when we're talking about student activity accounts and such, and how they might want to do fundraising and things of that nature. So we know that we would need a fundraising structure, a way for all the fundraising to be recorded, reported, and we're working on that Google form now as we speak as to how we can best get that managed and monitored so that you can then see a report on the board can see a report twice a year. So that would be part of this. The one thing I see missing on 511 is maybe a cross-reference to the 713.
Darcy or Scott, do you have thoughts?
Yep, I have a couple thoughts. Okay, so section Roman numeral 2, general statement of policy. Well, first of all, Lisa, I agree that this is, I'm okay with this policy in general, and that it doesn't cover everything, and that there's crowdfunding is addressed, things like that. But I think I agree that we need some sort of policy in here, but I don't at this time think that it needs to be everything in the kitchen sink. That can certainly be updated as more information is comes to bear and more comes out. So I do have a couple of things. So Roman numeral 2, general statement of policy. I don't understand the need for the second sentence about constraint to prevent fundraising activities from becoming too numerous and demanding, because there's so many different organizations, so many different clubs that would need to fundraise. And what does constraint mean? Does that mean that the principal at the high school has to say yes to some, organizations and no that they can't to other ones? And so I don't think we need the second sentence because there's, dance team has just as much right to do their fundraising activities as does robotics, as does theater, or whoever, you know. So I think the sentence is unnecessary. And I would replace it, you know, perhaps with some language about the board recognizes a desire and need by some student organizations for fundraising. This policy lays out guidelines around how that will be conducted, or something like that. I mean, that's the general statement of what the policy does. So, and that's, so then in 3A, so again, the building administrators are supposed to develop recommendations about who can do fundraising, what clubs can do fundraising. Then that information goes to the superintendent, and then who the superintendent says which.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about what we're
Okay.
thinking. We're looking at a form that would go out to all staff, would have it on Staff Central. And if they want to run a fundraiser for their club, their group, their whatever the case might be,
Yep.
they would fill out this form and it would first go to their principal.
Okay.
The principal then would move that forward to a superintendent or designee,
Okay.
who would then just ensure that it's aligned. So many of the things that I see come across from Say Donors Choose are things that, you know, I just caught one the other day that it's a matter of, well, we are ready or providing this particular item that's being requested. So when I connected with the tech department, they're like, yep. And so they were able then to communicate to the teachers. So it was a
Perfect.
matter of
Okay.
miscommunication of the fact that they didn't realize it was on its way. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So,
Great.
so the whole purpose of this is to make sure that the fundraising and its purpose is aligned with everything else that we're doing, that we're not missing something there.
Okay, and so I'm totally fine with that, as long as that process is you know, speaking from someone who's been very involved in many of these kinds of fundraisers, that it's a timely process, you know, that isn't too, that isn't too onerous on us overworked parents trying to raise money.
Okay.
So, okay, super. And then the only thing I would change about the second sentence of 3A would be to, instead of talking about it being an embarrassment, I would rephrase that sentence to be that that the fundraising must be conducted in line with student conduct policies or whatever, you know, because that's what we're trying to say, that you can't, your fundraiser has to be, is that what the second sentence is? Like, your fundraiser must be appropriate, you know, and whatever.
I think it's also getting at the fact that we don't want necessarily comments or suggestions that would be considered, like to say something like, you know, your group of students come from a certain social economic status, and therefore that's why the funds are needed. We're wanting to make sure that we're being
I get
cognizant of the fact that that can have impact on people, something
okay.
like that, or if there were photos that were taken that might identify, we want to make sure that that's not also happening for
that's okay. That's not at all how I read that sentence.
I know.
So yeah, okay, because I read it as like a student conduct, you know,
right,
thing,
no,
which I think is still, which I think you don't even then need to say, because clearly the form that you fill out is going to have that, you know, what the fundraiser is going to be. So so we have to rewrite that sentence to somehow make it clear that that's what we're trying to say, that we are trying to ensure the privacy, dignity, something of the students and staff involved in the fundraiser or something.
okay, I hear where you're coming from.
Okay, thank you. That's was approved in advance. Okay, so then I had under 4. Okay, so I'm not sure what, sorry, in 3C, I'm not sure what coordination of student fundraising through the district, what that means.
Sometimes that can be the timing. So, you know, if we know that there's other big fundraisers going on, we're trying to not get everything at the same time.
Okay,
So we want to have dialogue with our principals about that and trying to make sure that they're cognizant of that as they do make approvals of various different fundraisers.
Okay, and so is this, so that sort of leads me to another sort of question then, because as a parent for robotics or whatever, we have to do like our fundraising depending on when we need money to go to the, to go to regionals or whatever sort of thing. And so we have a specific time frame about when we can do it. And so I guess and for us to not be able to hold a fundraiser during that time frame could cause us then not to be able to go to regionals or whatever. And so I don't know if that information has to be like in the handbook, or if it has to somehow be communicated beyond the building administration to each of the clubs or whatever, because so somehow we would need to know that we couldn't do a big, we couldn't hold our big gala at the same time that the chess club was holding their big gala, because those would probably be conflicting, under this piece here, right? So that's the idea behind the chess club and robotics not holding their big black tie events, the same weekend kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. So somehow that just has to get out to the clubs, because by the time it gets to the building principal, like we've already planned, when it could be, and the timing could be important for different clubs.
Do you find that some of these fundraising are typically the same time period for these organizations and clubs?
Yeah, well, for some of them, certainly, because you've got a fall, you've got your fall sports season, fall sport and activity season, the winter sport and activity season, and a spring one, and so like Quiz Bowl always holds our fundraiser in April, because that's when we have a break of when there aren't a lot of other competitions going on. Right. And it's the time that we know how many kids have qualified for nationals. And so then we're fundraising to get those kids,
So I think we could start with a conversation with our principals and activity and athletic directors to make sure that they understand the need for us to kind of have a sense of what that looks like, and to maybe create kind of a calendar so we are aware. And then for us to then also be able to watch for and look for those fundraising requests, so that they're also not being missed or forgotten about.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's just, so because it's, parents are for the most part, ones, certainly in conjunction with the staff people, are planning these, but, that's, the timing of it is not in the forefront of our minds, compared to what everybody else is doing. It's when we would need to hold.
Right, so I'm wondering
Director Schatz, the other reason for this piece is the burden on families. If you have an elementary, middle, and a high school all fundraising at the same time.
Sure,
So,
Yep.
That's the other coordination, is how do you not put the burden on families? I've got 3 kids and I'm asking all of my family and friends. So that's the other part of coordination we hear sometimes from families.
Yep, I can see that. Yep, for sure. So it's, it's to try and coordinate all this is going to be a tricky job for somebody. And so, but I just know from experience that there's generally very specific timeframes for when these, the clubs that I've been involved in did their fundraising efforts, because that's when you knew what money you needed when, so. Okay, so then under 4, and so what's the report going to be like? What's the report going to be and what's it says at least annually. What's the anticipated timing?
So actually under 713, and since we just had that one come before the board, I don't know if it's even out here yet, but it actually listed the things that we would make sure that we had included. And so as we're building, I'm just pulling it up here real quick. As we're building the form, we're making sure that we're including all these fields so that we have all the data that we need in order to report it out.
Okay.
And so, it's not in the version I'm looking at right now, but I believe it was the typical, what is the activity? What's the timing of it? What is the purpose of it? How will the funds be spent or used? And then we added to it, even asking for an account code so we could be clear and be sure that it was within our structure and that it wasn't a booster or some other outside organization.
Okay,
So as long as they're considering the funds coming into our general fund, then that's what we need to report on. And that's what we're trying to control here with these policies and with our framework. So I think we've got, we're building
perfect.
that framework for us to be able to track and monitor that.
Okay, so this isn't a separate fundraising report. This is part of the one that, as you said, we've already discussed for 713. Okay, so
Yep.
I wasn't clear if this was separate reporting, all one report, because that report is, it does say annual, and this one says at least annually. And
Correct.
so
And
I wasn't clear. Okay,
Yeah, it's an area that we have not been able to get our hands all around it to be able to give the board a sufficient and complete report. And so
Yep.
we're hoping that with the framework being built and the form being established, that we'd be, getting better data that we can then
Sure.
share that out with you and have that then. It's not going to be perfect out of the gate. I know that, but
Yep.
we'll build on it and we'll get it where it needs to go.
okay, perfect. So yeah, so as long as, if the 713 report says annual report, then this one
Twice
should
a
probably,
year.
okay, so twice a year. So then this one should match whatever that language is, if it's the same data for the same
Okay.
report. Yeah,
And I'd
Okay.
even say if there should be the cross-reference to 713 in this
Yep.
policy, and if we wanted to cite the report to be referencing that specific report.
okay. Perfect. Yeah, but so that was my last piece, was the 713 bit that Leslie. So that's all I have, Leslie, for the
Scott,
Seven
any-
thirteen is on the board agenda for second reading on the 10th.
Okay,
Perfect.
but we should have it cross-referenced in this policy for moving forward with this policy.
Yep.
We're moving forward with this policy.
I agree. I hear you.
Scott?
Darcy made a lot of good points. I just have one additional question or clarification. Under 3A, the building administrator shall be responsible for developing recommendations to the superintendent.
Yes.
I'm a little concerned, I guess, about Principal A having a different criteria for making their recommendations than Principal B, and is that going to lead to inequities potentially between different schools if this principal is more supportive of let's do all the fundraising, and Principal B is a little more strict about what fundraising is going to be deemed acceptable at their school?
Right, so this kind of falls into the whole donation policy as well. When we've been talking about our framework, we are trying to find a way to better incorporate, you currently receive a report on donations in your board report, and that is through a Google form. What we're trying to do is create a method that is through the e-commerce opportunities that we have, so that as people choose to donate online, they would immediately be directed to, first of all, like, what is it that our needs are? And so if you can imagine kind of a catalog or a choice of options for a corporation that wants to donate to ISD 191, and they could go to this website, find what it is that they want to support, and they could choose that then and make that donation direct to that particular area. And it would go directly into not only the cash going into the system, but it would also then go directly into our reporting processes, so that we would be able to more actively capture that data as it's being generated. And with this, it also means then identifying with our principals what are the needs across the different levels, and how is it that we want to really kind of focus our outside contributors so that they can really be hitting on the needs that we really need them to help us with. And that's not something we have in play right now, and we'd really like to help like to help others help us, right? And so we want to be able to show them what it is that looks like. And to address your concern, Director Hume, about the whole equity, it is an issue. It's a concern, and it's one that from our perspective, we think would best be managed by trying to find what's common. What is it we all need help with? What is it we can truly promote and put out there and have on a list, and provide that out there so that people can then choose what they like to provide. And as soon as enough funds are raised for example, let's just use an example of at the high school calculators, right? So we know that they use TI calculators and they have a need for them to be replaced on a regular basis. So how can we put out there 8 calculators, and once that's funding has been received, then we go ahead and we purchase those, and that comes then off the list. That kind of a
Nice.
concept.
Yep. Great.
It won't be there immediately, I caution, but it is our goal to try and work that through with the principals. And so as well as this policy allows for the building administrators to be responsible for developing, you know, it's also kind of, there just has to be this kind of funnel, the framework of how it all starts, right? Because they know more of what the needs are at the building level, and yet we need to find a way to make it so that it makes sense district-wide too and equity-wise.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I think the only other thing that I wanted to add was under 3A as well, where it says to the superintendent, do we need to put or designee?
I think so too.
Okay.
3A.
Yeah. Great. And then we'll.
Good to be consistent.
Yep. And then next, do you want to do policy 905 next, Lisa?
Sure, let's do that. So under 905, this is, it doesn't exist currently, but what you do see before you is a copy that does have quite a bit of markup. This has been through the policy committee in the past. So I didn't want to necessarily start from scratch on this one, as when I looked back through my notes, these seem to be, you know, I thought reasonable adjustments that didn't necessarily create an issue where we couldn't move forward with it, although I'm not sure your perspective. So let's just start from the top. We're just removing the note as we don't feel that that's necessary to maintain in the policy. We have marked out on 1 for a purpose, the last phrase, to students and parents in the schools, and just left it with a period then right after services. We did add in a definition of what is advertising, and this was from past discussions that this has come up. So we kept that in there. As you look at the advertising guidelines, you see there's some renumbering here for that to be number 4. And then we have some changes here in the bottom few sentences here. For example, advertisements may be rejected if determined to be false, misleading, or deceptive, or if they relate to illegal activity in direct violation of other school district policies. So we didn't want to get into too much, you know, judgmental of, you know, what's antisocial, what's not. We just wanted to say if it's in direct violation of our policies. And then the faculty advisors seem better for advertising for it to be instead a site administrator is responsible for screening. So in many of these cases, this falls right now currently to Guillaume, as he's the one who's involved in some of the advertising. And oftentimes our challenge in this policy is going to be the advertising that is promoted and in some cases managed by outside organizations on our behalf. And this one's going to be a little bit of a struggle. For instance, we have booster clubs that want to help, and they can help with people power, right? With people being able to connect and make their relationships with other corporations or outside entities make a difference. And they can bring in, for example, someone who might be interested in throwing up some advertising on space that we make available. That the challenge with all of this is the content of that advertising we want to be able to control. The challenge is sometimes being able to get our hands around everything that's being talked about and agreed to. And so if it's on our property, we want to know about it, we want to be able to approve it, and we want to make sure that we understand the terms and conditions around that. Now, we should not necessarily be giving up that advertising rights, but I'll tell you right now, it's happening without us having a policy in place, and it's happening without us having a method to manage it. So we've got some work to do in this area, there's no doubt, but this is a start. Moving on down, we have school superintendent or designee being addressed. In letter B, along with, we did have removed in our previous conversations the idea of, in no instance will advertising device be erected or maintained on school district property or within 100 feet of a school that is visible to and primarily intended to advertise and inform or attract, or which does attract the attention of operators and occupants of motor vehicles. You know, our city has a policy already in play too, so I mean, it's gonna not get approved if we don't do that anyway. So I don't think we needed that in the policy, was the thought. Letter C. This was added in previous discussions, as we believe there's a desire not to have the promotion of competition, and we actually have, I think, had ads on our high school board that has gone against this, and so that's the challenge. We need to get this in place so we can then utilize this as a talking point in making sure we know what's approved and what's not approved. Letter D is a renumbering as a result of the addition above, but it does also mention the fact that now this is advertising, but it's now talking about donations which include and carry advertisement. So it's referencing that policy 706. Whether you want to just put that in the reference below, or if you just want to leave it like this, is kind of, you know, which way you want to go. And then the rest of this, I believe, is renumbering. Letter E has so this allows for our nonprofit entities and organizations may be allowed to use our name, our students or facilities for purposes of advertising or promotion if it's educational, excuse me, and if prior approval is obtained from the superintendent or designee. And it does say advertising will be limited to the specific event or purpose approved by the superintendent or designee. So this would allow then some of what we have happening to continue. If we didn't have that ability, then that would possibly eliminate the ability for some of our booster groups to assist us with some things. Additionally, then we did modify this in the past under accounting under 5, where we have a dollar amount here, so that there is a periodic report similar to what we just discussed with the fundraising. We're working on making sure that the advertising also would have a means to be reported to you. This will require probably a little bit different kind of structure, one that's more internal, which it's kind of, how can I give you a report right now that is complete? And that's my worry and concern. At this point, I can give you a report of what I know of, but I'm not so certain it's complete. And so we do the best we can with that. We do have a special account code that we use only for advertising revenue, and that has not exceeded 10,000 annually. So at this point, we're not necessarily reporting anything more to you than we're just recording that appropriately. So it's a question of what exactly the board would feel would be necessary. And that is kind of a summary of this particular policy of 905.
Thank you, Lisa. Darcy, Scott.
Well, as somebody who put Lisa through her paces with this policy when she first wrote it last year or the year before, whatever it was, this is I think it's a great basis. You know, we'll of course have to, you know, be updated as different scenarios come into, you know, practice, or, you know, we run into different situations. But at least I think you did a really good job of capturing the essence of what I probably recall as many questions I had about this. So I think it's a great policy. I mean, you've addressed what I remember to be a lot of my questions about this, and I think we have to. I think we put it into practice, and then as we run into situations, and we update it as necessary. So thanks for that. I apologize for all my many questions about this before.
No, it's good.
I just have one I'm curious at the oh, my thing's not scrolling. 4C, the one about competition, no advertising which promotes competition as it relates to enrollment, athletics, and activities for the district will be allowed. Like what would be an example, I guess, of athletic advertising or activity advertising that would not be allowed under this? Like I guess what I'm thinking of is the scoreboard at the football game, and if they flashed up there, hey, come to the basketball game that's on Saturday afternoon at the gym, that's technically an athletic competition, but it doesn't feel like that's what this is referring to.
So I think, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lisa. Oh, well, at least when we did this before, when the policy committee first looked at this, we were thinking of like competing schools, competing, organizations that were advertising their, competing towns advertising their
Right.
traveling basketball
Example.
program compared to ours, that.
Right. Okay.
An outside entity, the Black
Move
and
to
Gold
Apple Valley,
Foundation.
check out our wrestling program, that type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That part totally makes sense. I just wasn't sure if it was promoting our own activities internally.
Those are okay.
That's not really technically advertising, but in a way it is though.
But is it a way we can make it clearer that it's our school competition, or I'm not sure if it's evident with just saying that word competition? Thoughts
Well,
about that?
Well, it'd be like we wouldn't allow, we wouldn't allow a charter school, to advertise,
Right.
for us, things like that, So I think it's,
Is there a way just to clarify that?
outside organization.
Yeah, external, exactly. That internally we can promote our own athletics or activities, which are the two things. I think the enrollment thing is pretty self-explanatory in my mind, but internally we should be able to advertise any of our upcoming athletic events or activities that are happening however we see fit within the district, I think.
How about no advertising which promotes external competing entities, especially as it relates?
Very nice. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
like that works.
Okay.
Did you have something else, Scott?
I'm just trying to remember. It feels like it's been 84 years since I've been to a high school football game, but it's only been 12 months. But do we have advertising on this football scoreboard currently? And how does that, maybe that's what kind of triggered this whole conversation.
Yeah, it is. Our current scoreboard is
a can of worms that I'm over here.
you're breaking up a bit, so I'm not sure I understood.
I wasn't talking. I think
Okay.
my internet flickered after I asked my question.
Okay. Our existing scoreboard does have advertising that had been arranged for and is revenue is received by the Black and Gold Foundation. So the board leased the land for $1 for the purpose of them being able to add the electronic advertising scoreboard. And so with that, then that is an example of where, those agreements that have been entered into are not necessarily entered into by our school board at this moment. And so therefore, that's been a bit of a concern, and yet that was in play before we even started the conversations around the advertising, and it's something that we'll need to work through as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And then do we need we'll pull up 706.
Okay, so 706 doesn't have any adjustments to it other than what is currently in play. I bring it forward simply so that if there is anything that so often the whole conversation around fundraising all of a sudden turns into a conversation around donations. Because we want to make sure people understand is that the fundraising policy addresses what it is that we do as a fundraiser. If our PTO, for example, has its own tax ID, is doing their own fundraiser, how they do that fundraiser is going to be up to them. And yet when they bring that forward with the proceeds coming into the school as a donation, then it needs to follow our donation policy.
Mhm.
So they do kind of all three go hand in hand, and you see references, cross references across the three of them. And I think that it's really more just brought forward just to make sure that as we take a look at these other policies, you're also aware of what the donation policy calls for.
Yeah, I think though that you with the cross reference though, you would need to cross reference in 706 the new policies that we're reviewing now. So
Oh,
once,
good point. Good point. Sorry,
they
I
would
just
need to
mentioned it and then
cross
didn't do
back.
it. Yep.
Mhm.
So we'll cross reference both 511 and advertising 905.
Yep. Are there any other thoughts or comments, Darcy or Scott, on this? Just adding in that other cross reference.
None for me.
Did we lose Darcy? I don't see Darcy anymore. So,
Looks like we did.
I think
Did we
lost
need
it.
a cross-reference to 713, the student activities?
I
Under
think so.
donations, I don't know that you do. I think fundraising does, but I don't know that student accounting on that. Okay.
Okay. Great. And then, so then the next steps are, with these two policies, was anything needing to be changed or reviewed much, or both can go to first reading at an upcoming board meeting? 905 and 511. Scott, do you think? You're nodding
So-
yes.
To
Yeah.
bring all three back to first reading?
Yeah, well, I mean, if 706 is just adding cross-reference, I don't
Yep.
think that needs to, but I think that, I mean, the two they're obviously brand new do.
So you don't need to see it before then, is my point.
I don't think we asked for, do we ask for large changes? I'm sorry, my mind's a little scattered right now, so I'm trying to keep tabs.
511 just had some rewording that needs to be figured out yet. So I can certainly bring that, just have that done before the first reading.
Yeah. And I don't think we had much in terms of rewording on the advertising, so I think we're okay there.
No, that's good.
Great.
Slow verb.
Well, those are our agenda items. Oh, Darcy just sent a text. She said, oh, she lost power. So,
No.
Okay.
So I think we're good to adjourn. Do we have everything we need? Jamie, do you have it?
We're bringing, okay, so I'm seeing that we're gonna bring 522 and 530, 535 will come back to policy review and everything else goes forward. And it
Oh.
looks like it's probably gonna be mostly on new business with the exception of 706, which would probably be non-substantive. Unless you want them all brought together.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we should bring them all together just because
Okay.
if we're doing that cross-reference.
Okay,
Yep.
sounds good.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting.
Thanks.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thursday.
Have a good evening.